So, here I am, a 40-year-old journalist from New York sitting at my old wooden desk in this cramped apartment way out on the edge of Brooklyn. Outside you can hear cars humming along, a siren wailing somewhere in the distance, and that heavy June sky of 2025 just sort of hanging over the city. On the table in front of me, there's this mess: yellowed newspaper clippings, tattered books, internet printouts, and, of course, a cup of stale coffee that smells like yesterday. My fingers nervously fidget with a pen as I stare at the blank screen of my laptop. Today, June 18th, I'm starting this story with a question that honestly keeps me up at night. What if all these stories about alien abductions aren't just fiction? What if, behind the thousands of reports I've been digging through these past few months, there's something more than just fantasy or a thirst for fame? I take a sip of cold coffee, and the case that started it all pops into my mind. The story of Betty and Barney Hill, that couple from New Hampshire whose lives changed forever back in 1961. Picture this. It's the night of September 19th, 1961. Betty and Barney, tired after a vacation up in Canada, are driving home along Route 3. All around them are the dark forests of New Hampshire, tall pines closing over the road like giant paws, almost ready to grab the car. Shadows from the trees writhe on the asphalt, almost like they're alive, and the wind howls through the branches, sounding like someone's whispering out there in the dark. The moon barely peeks through the clouds, casting this dim, kind of deathly light. Barney, an engineer with a sharp mind and a pretty skeptical view of the world, is behind the wheel of their old Chevrolet Bel Air, cracked seats, the smell of gasoline everywhere. Betty, a social worker with a vivid imagination, is looking out the window, chatting about Montreal, when suddenly she spots a bright light in the sky. At first it's tiny, just like a star, but then it grows, moves way too fast for a plane and just feels too strange for a satellite. She shouts, "Barney, look!" Her voice trembling with a mix of curiosity and anxiety, her fingers digging into his shoulder. Barney grumbles that it's probably some advertising stunt, but still, he pulls over to the side of the road, grabs the binoculars from the glove compartment, and steps out into the cold air. The ground beneath his feet is damp, smells like moisture and rotting leaves. He raises the binoculars to his eyes, and what he sees just makes him freeze. Through the murky lenses, a disc-shaped object appears, about 60 feet across with flashing lights red, green, blue like some twisted Christmas garland, but way more sinister, way more alien. The object just hovers over the trees, its metallic surface gleaming in the moonlight, reflecting his pale face like a mirror from another world. There's this low hum coming from it so deep, Barney feels it vibrating in his bones, resonating in his chest like the drum of some invisible nightmare. In the windows of the object he sees figures moving. He counts 8, maybe 11 beings, all dressed in shiny black uniforms, like obsidian just swallowing the light. Their movements are sharp, mechanical, almost like broken marionettes, and their faces are hidden behind these dark helmets, with nothing visible except for huge black eyes, bottomless, just like an abyss. One of the beings turns and looks right at him. Barney feels something cold and alien pierce his mind, a voice he doesn't hear with his ears but feels in his head. "Stay where you are and keep watching." His legs seem frozen to the ground, his whole body trembling like he's standing in an icy wind, and his heart is pounding so hard it feels like it might just burst out of his chest. The object descends lower, branches on the pines cracking and breaking under its invisible weight, and the air fills with the smell of ozone and something metallic, kind of acrid. Barney feels his skin go clammy with sticky sweat, and there's a lump of terror rising in his throat. He tries to scream, but his voice just won't come out, like someone squeezing his throat. Finally, with a huge effort, he snaps out of it, rushes back to the car and shouts to Betty, "Drive!" They take off, tires screeching on the asphalt, his heart pounding in his ears. And then, suddenly, there's this beeping sound, high and sharp, like a knife on glass, and darkness just swallows them up. They come to their senses already at home, in Portsmouth, in their small living room with faded wallpaper and an old dusty radio. The clock shows that 7 hours have passed, even though the trip should have only taken 4. Their clothes are stained with these strange gray spots, smelling of something chemical. Barney's watch has stopped, hands frozen at 2:47, and Betty's dress is torn to shreds, like it's been clawed by talons. They can't remember how they drove 35 miles. Later, under hypnosis with Dr. Benjamin Simon, a renowned psychiatrist with a soft voice and a stern gaze, they talk about gray beings, about 5 feet tall, with large eyes and thin, bony hands, cold as ice. Betty recalls dreams that tormented her for 5 nights in a row, the road blocked by blinding light, figures leading her into the ship, needles piercing her skin with sharp, burning pain. She describes how her body was paralyzed, how she felt her mind separating from her flesh as cold, slippery fingers slid over her skin, leaving a feeling of dirt that just couldn't be washed away. Barney speaks of telepathic pressure, how his will just dissolved under the gaze of those eyes, and a weird sensation, almost like his body was cut into pieces and then put back together. But not quite right, not quite his own. Their story, described in John G. Fuller's 1966 book, The Interrupted Journey, becomes a legend. In 2011, the state of New Hampshire even put up a memorial plaque at the site, a rusty sign, covered in moss, now photographed by tourists who have no idea of the horror it conceals. Since then, thousands of Americans, farmers in faded overalls, office clerks with calloused hands, truckers with bloodshot eyes have told similar stories. A 1992 Roper poll showed that 1 in 50 adults in the U.S. might have experienced something like this. That same year, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology held a conference. Scientists in suits argued while ufologists in stretch sweaters drew diagrams on a chalkboard. These stories have seeped into books, movies, talk shows, but I just can't stop thinking, where is the truth? I pick up my pen, pull my notebook closer, and start digging through this chaos of stories, the smell of coffee and the noise of Brooklyn outside the window. Morning in New York smells like fresh bagels and exhaust fumes. I'm sitting in a cafe on the corner of Fifth Avenue at a small table by the window, where the glass is fogged up from the breath of passers-by. In front of me is a stack of notes, scribbled in small handwriting, and a cup of espresso that I sip carefully, trying not to burn myself. Science tries to explain the inexplicable. There's this theory about sleep paralysis, a state where you wake up but can't move, and shadows, figures, sometimes voices appear in the room. The Journal of Sleep Research writes that up to 40% of people have experienced this at least once. Some see an old woman by the bed, others, gray aliens with needles whose cold tools leave phantom pain. The descriptions match pressure on the chest, fear, the feeling of being dragged into the abyss. But can this explain torn dresses, stopped watches, burns on the skin? There's another hypothesis, false memories. Psychologist Elizabeth Loftus, back in the 90s, proved that under hypnosis, a person can remember things that never actually happened. Betty and Barney only talked about the abduction after sessions with Dr. Simon, his deep, calm voice pulling images of the ship, beings, and procedures from them. Maybe he, without meaning to, planted those images in their heads. I sit there pondering, watching the steam rise from my coffee. But there are cases that just don't fit into these neat frameworks, and honestly they keep pulling me deeper. Take Antonio Villas-Boas, a Brazilian farmer with calloused hands and honest eyes. In 1957 he was plowing a field under the scorching sun when a ship hovered over him, egg-shaped, with red light, humming like a swarm of angry bees. Beings in suits like silver foil dragged him inside. He described the smell, acrid like ammonia, burning his nostrils, and the noise of engines that made his blood pound in his temples. They took his blood, inserting a long needle into his arm, making him feel his body freezing, his veins pulsing with pain. Then, as he claimed, one of the women, with pale skin, cold as marble, and eyes like black holes, engaged in intimate contact with him, her touch both alluring and repulsive, leaving a feeling as if his soul was being sucked out. Antonio returned home trembling, with burns on his skin, red and blistering, and swore until the end of his life that it was true. Brazilian authorities recorded his words, newspapers buzzed, but skeptics just shrugged. And I think, where did a farmer get such details? What about today? In June 2024, in Dallas, Texas, 35-year-old Michael Johnson, a delivery driver with an eagle tattoo on his neck, was walking at night along the Trinity River. He loved these walks, the sound of water, stars overhead, solitude. But that night, he saw a light, bright, white like a spotlight, only silent, cutting through the darkness like a knife. Michael woke up aboard what he called a UFO, with gray beings whose long fingers slid over his skin, cold and wet like a corpse's. He described how his body was paralyzed, how he felt sharp pain from tools piercing his flesh, and how a whisper sounded in his head, inhuman, low, making his hair stand on end. He returned 2 hours later with a burn on his arm, red, blistering as if branded with a hot iron, and no memory of how he got home. The police shrugged, but the Dallas Morning News printed his story. On Reddit, users wrote, "I had the same thing in Oregon last year. Someone even posted a photo of a similar burn. Is this real, or, could it be mass psychosis?" Another case. August 2024, Yosemite National Park, California. A group of tourists was roasting marshmallows by the campfire, laughing and, drinking beer from tin cans. Suddenly, a triangular object with 3 lights, red, green, and blue, flashing in a rhythm that made their heads spin, hovered over the forest. 28-year-old Sarah Miller, a teacher from San Francisco with short hair and glasses, went to the tent for her jacket. An hour later she returned, missing one boot with a torn jacket, wild eyes, and her voice trembling. She says she was taken aboard a ship. The beings, tall with large eyes, almost human but with skin like gray wax, showed her a star map and told her telepathically, "We've been watching you for a long time." She described how her body was bound to a table by invisible restraints, how needles entered her skin, leaving burning marks, and how she heard sounds, a low hum mixed with a high-pitched squeal that made her mind scream in horror. Her friends confirmed they saw the light, but skeptics on Twitter wrote, "Too much beer, Sarah." ABC News aired a report, and the internet exploded with debates. I flipped through these notes and, goosebumps run down my spine. To show how widespread this phenomenon is, here are a few more cases. In November 1975, lumberjack Travis Walton disappeared in the forests of Arizona. His colleagues saw a beam of light pull him into the sky. 5 days later he returned, telling of a ship where beings with thin arms and huge eyes conducted experiments on him. He described lying on a cold table, feeling as if his skin was being cut by invisible blades, and hearing a whisper like an echo in the void. His story became the basis for the book, Fire in the Sky. In 1989, Linda Napolitano from New York claimed she was abducted from her Manhattan apartment through a 12th-floor window. She described her body rising into the air, surrounded by light, her skin burning with heat, and seeing strange symbols on the ship's walls pulsing as if alive. 2 security guards confirmed they saw her floating in the air like a ghost. So, in January 2008, down in Stephenville, Texas, Ricky Sorrell saw this massive object hovering over his ranch. He said it was the size of a football field, with lights so bright they actually hurt his eyes. He felt this weird pressure in his ears, and later on, he started having these nightmares about lying on a table, surrounded by beings whose voices sounded like, well, scraping metal. In 2023, the Pentagon released a report. 144 cases of UAPs since 2004 still remained a mystery. And by 2025, according to the New York Times, that number had grown to 300. Pilots saw objects moving at speeds that just, totally defied the laws of physics, without wings, without any exhaust. Dr. David Jacobs, a ufologist, believes that abduction stories are just too consistent to be fiction. Psychologist Susan Clancy, on the other hand, offers an explanation through sleep paralysis, but she admits that not all cases fit this theory. I look at my notes and think, well, science is silent, but the sky speaks. Evening of June 18, 2025. Twilight thickens over Brooklyn, streetlights come on, reflecting in puddles. I sit by the window with a cup of tea, coffee's run out. Suddenly I see a point in the sky, bright white like a lighthouse. At first I think Venus, a plane, but it moves, smoothly, too fast. I grab my phone, fingers trembling, and try to record a video. The light grows, and I see outlines. Smooth, alien, with a hum that shakes the windows and resonates in my chest. I feel the air become heavy, something pressing on my mind. Betty and Barney, Michael Johnson, Sarah Miller, their faces flash before my eyes. The light blinds, the hum intensifies, and suddenly, silence, the light goes out, the sky is empty. I stand, heart pounding, sweat trickling down my temples. A plane, a lantern in the clouds, but I know, it was something else. I sit at the table, open my laptop, fingers tapping the keys. Today I saw something I can't explain. This story is not the end, but the beginning. What if they're here, watching from the shadows, waiting around the corner? What if I'm next? I look out the window. The night is dark, but somewhere up there, something moves. Maybe it's stars, maybe it's eyes. I turn off the light and listen to the silence, but it no longer seems empty. It's alive, and it's watching me. In the darkness, I hear a rustle, faint, barely audible, like footsteps behind the wall. My breath catches. Is it the wind, or something closer than I think?